What if stories and legends can offer us the key to unravelling the hottest political issues of the day? What would it mean if all the answers to today's burning questions were presented in easy-to-digest narratives and myths? Join us as we examine some of the most fascinating tales, some mythological, some historical, and apply their lessons to understanding the chaos of modern politics. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Welcome to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production. We've all heard the term false flags, and it seems that people are using it far more freely now than ever before. But is there a new element to these stories, or is the prevalence of false flag accusations just making it seem like such incidents are solely in the realms of the conspiracy theorist? The more we hear people talking about false flags, the less we tend to believe that they're taking place. We have shock jocks calling almost every terrorist incident some kind of cover-up. We have the Twitter mob reacting to every shooting, every international or foreign policy decision, as if it were a staged event to seize power. And here's the problem. False flags do happen, and they're happening more and more. But because of the deluge of accusations, the majority of the public now just cast such claims aside with little thought. Today, I want to look at the Russian Collusion story and examine it through the lens of whether it appears to be a false flag or not. To do this, we need to look at several aspects. Firstly, what are false flags? What factors indicate that something untoward is happening? Second, can we demonstrate that these factors have been used in the past in a verifiable false flag? Third, do governments actually engage in false flag operations? And fourth, do these factors apply to the Russiagate story? Let's start by looking at where the term false flag actually came from. It's deeply entwined with another term we commonly use, true colours. Many years ago, ships would use their flags to signal what country they represented, what kind of ship they were, navy vessel, trading ship, that kind of thing. And upon seeing someone else's flag, a captain could decide whether this was likely to be a friendly encounter or whether to turn sails and flee. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this system of trust was abused. Looters or pirates, and sometimes even navy ships, would hoist a false flag to allow them to get nearer a ship that they intended to harm, lulling their prey into a false sense of security. But here's something strange. In almost every recorded case of this, at the last moment, the attacking ship would lower their false flag and raise their true colours before joining the fray. It seems strange that there would be this almost sense of honour among pirates and brigands that they felt they had to show their true colours in advance, but they did. Clearly something has evolved since those times. If the Russian collusion story really is a false flag operation, it is of the modern kind, where no true colours are raised for matters of honour. What makes a situation a false flag? It's certainly not just a secret action. In fact, historian, Cold War researcher and ufologist Richard Dolan has put together 7 points to identify a false flag. He points out that not all the elements are necessary, but that a genuine false flag would contain at least some, if not most, of these factors. As Dolan himself says, false flags are just a form of propaganda, a language of deception in order to persuade people towards a particular position. Perhaps in the Russian collusion story, this position would be that the President of the United States was actively aided by the Russians to steal the presidency. What used to be called PSYOPs has now been rebranded into Military Information Support Operations, or MISO, which in the government's own words states, quote, planned operations to convey selected information and indicators to foreign audiences to influence their emotions, motives, objective reasoning, and ultimately the behaviour of foreign governments, organisations, groups, and individuals in a manner favourable to the originator's objectives. End quote. One such confirmed false flag was carried out by the US government called Operation Mockingbird, which allegedly is now finished. This began in the 1940s and ran through to the 1970s, and involved putting CIA agents and assets into the mainstream media, where they would work as regular journalists, broadcasters, editors, etc., but would, in reality, be answering to the intelligence community and ready to spin news to suit the purpose and the projects of the coordinator. The US was not alone in this type of operation, though. The British MI5 security services also did something similar with the BBC, through whom they vetted thousands of people to keep out the subversive elements. This ran through to the 90s, at least. Back in 1954, the government prepared a policy statement that specifically highlighted how it worked in PSYOPs, giving 3 different level indicators: white, grey, and black. Black being a pure false flag perpetrated on the citizens of the United States. This is still in use today. But what elements contribute to a genuine false flag? What should we be looking out for? Richard Dolan suggests the following. 1. It's a spectacular, emotional event. 2. Instant media saturation. 3. The case is quickly closed. 4. The scapegoat. 5. Decisive and negative government action. 6. Important anomalies and questions. 7. Outcome. Who benefits? As mentioned before, not all of these need to be in place, just most of them. Let's take a look at the Russia story and the subsequent Mueller investigation through the prism of these 7 factors. Was the story an emotional event? Well, certainly. The fire and fury that a US president was controlled or in hock to the Russians and is now sitting in the White House thanks to nefarious actions. This is pretty emotional. And of course, point number 2, it did receive complete media saturation, almost from day one. Every network ran stories many times a day on this, telling us that the presidency had been hijacked by bad faith Russian actors. And point 3, the case was immediately closed, at least in terms of public perception. There was no brooking of dissent amongst the broadcasters. This was certainly a clear-cut case that President Trump had engaged with the Russians. The 4th point about the scapegoat is a little harder to nail down. Certainly Trump was the enemy in this tale, but so too were the Russians. And by association, all those millions of people who voted for Donald Trump, according to the media, they were easily led because of their bigotry and racism. This is according to the news purveyors, but it certainly seems to make them also the scapegoats for this. Point 5, about the decisive and negative government action. Well, this would be the Mueller investigation. For more than 2 years it dragged out and left the nation believing that there was Russian collusion, allowed unwarranted calls for impeachment to go ahead, and divided the nation on the world stage. It was damaging. The anomalies and questions element is pretty clear. Why did not Mueller look into the source of the dodgy dossier? Why no mention that Fusion was hired by the Clinton campaign? Mueller's refusal to state whether he spoke to 2 of the biggest characters in this play, Professor Joseph Misford, Christopher Steele, about their origins and involvement. Plenty of unanswered questions, and perhaps unasked questions too. And finally, who benefits? The outcome. Well, this is pretty clear-cut. If, in the eyes of America, the president is guilty, the Democrats win the White House, and power for the next 4 years at least, probably 8. That's a handy prize. Richard Dolan is a serious researcher who states that most false flags won't include all the elements he outlines. But in this case, it appears fairly plain to see that each number was hit, and hit hard. Has America just witnessed one of the biggest false flag operations of all time? And more importantly, we have to ask ourselves if it worked, or is it still in play? President Trump is sitting on a booming economy, unheard of employment levels, and major industry growth on a scale not seen in such a long time. His second term in the White House should be all but assured, yet it isn't. As 2020 fast approaches, the certainty that should be here, historically speaking, that Trump wins, is not looking so certain. Was this perhaps the entire purpose of the Russiagate story? To cast doubt in the mind of the voting public, to distract and make weary those who would otherwise vote? If so, someone has grievously harmed the United States, and these might well be the people who control the levers of power very, very soon. Thank you for listening to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production. Join us next episode, where we'll be talking more history, politics, legends and stories. Until next time, thanks for listening.